Why does the electoral system exist in the US and not the popular vote count? Part of it is that if it was popular vote, then small states would be completely ignored by politics. The smaller states wouldn't join the union with the popular vote as law. They didn't want to join and then lose all their rights. Do most people here just make up history? I read once that less than 10% of presidents elected didn't win the popular vote. It's one of those things that becomes an issue on the rare occasions that popular vote and electoral college win don't coalesce. Maybe if it happened more frequently it would be seen as a more pressing issue. Because the United States is built to be a union of independent states, rather than a unitary government, the state vote for the president, and the people vote for the choice of the state. The best optimal strategy for the most influence in the election process is for the state to vote as a bloc, even though they absolutely can choose to split the vote based on popular vote. It's so California and New York can't decide what's best for Montana and Alaska. It's easier to understand when you remember that state legislatures used to elect senators. Because all methods of voting having flaws, and this was the one they decided to go with. We would have never been united in the first place if it hadn't been implemented. There's zero reason for a tiny low population state to stay part of the union if they can be strong armed into policy by states with 10x their population. At that point, they would simply want to govern themselves and be considered their own territory for sake of policy and law. Imagine if your neighbor got to dictate the rules of your house simply because they had a more expensive house. No one would go for that deal. Because we don't want heavily populated states dictating the entire country. The system was decided in a time when mass communication wasn't a thing, and also on the assumption that there wouldn't be any political parties. So rather than the people voting for some presidential candidate that they didn't know anything about, they would vote for representatives that they did know and trust. And then these representatives would gather to elect the president. Also keep in mind that the president wasn't supposed to hold much power. They were not meant to create laws or such, but just to implement the laws decided upon by Congress. So in that context, all that mattered was that the president was capable and trustworthy to perform this duty. His own political opinions shouldn't matter. Now more and more of these assumptions has become false, and thus the electoral system makes less and less sense. The Founding Fathers were vehemently opposed to French democracy, even going as far as to defame it by calling it mob rule, hence our constitutional republic. The EC system does as much good as bad, and that's why it's so hard to even begin to think of a better system. But one thing is for sure, popular vote is not it. Because without the Electoral College, less populated states and rural communities wouldn't have a voice in the presidential election. This can be broken into two questions. Why was it formed in the first place? And why does it still exist today? As for the first part, it was formed because the smaller states wanted to make sure they had protection against the larger states in the Union. They wanted to make sure they had a balance of power. And since all the states needed to work together to stay even mildly cohesive, the larger states agreed. That's why constitutional amendments take 2/3 RDS of states to agree, not 2/3 RDS of representatives to agree. This was also back when the federal government was pretty damn small and, while not insignificant, didn't have much power to make the states actually do things. The second question is the same answer as most unfair systems. It keeps the people it benefits in power, and they keep it around because of it. Aside from minor things like morals and concepts of fairness, There's no reason someone from a small state would support getting rid of the Electoral College, or lessening their own power. And politicians who get elected because of the system obviously aren't going to dismantle it. Out from underneath them, they wouldn't win their next election. The good old vicious cycle of power. When America was founded, it was essentially a loose confederation of independent states. At that time you had some states like New York, and small states feared that they would dominate the electoral process. That's also why we have both a House, set by population, and a Senate, where every state gets the same vote. This is an extremely rough overview, but basically what it comes down to. People from other nations usually don't understand how big America is, and how independent our states historically have been. Please explain why all electoral votes go to the party with the most electoral votes versus dividing up the votes earned by each party? It's to keep states like California, New York, Texas from deciding the election due to their large populations. Read about it. Because NYNCA would basically decide every election, making smaller states irrelevant. It's a gigantic country. Ensures every state gets a say when it comes to the direction of the country. The dumbest thing we could ever do is get rid of the electoral votes. Because everything would always be decided by New York, California, and Texas. Because democratic systems are not perfect, and one of the biggest risks they have is their propensity towards mob rule. Just because the majority of people want something doesn't make it right or good, and the government needs to be set up in such a way that accounts for these risks. The Electoral College used to be a fail-safe mechanism that would have prevented someone like Trump from getting elected. Even if he had won the popular vote, he was obviously too close to doing so, and that should concern you. The way it works now is many states have criminal penalties for unfaithful electors. But they were actually a key element in the design. It is precisely unfaithful electors that were supposed to be the last line of defense against someone like Trump coming to power. It is only through the twisting of the EC, ironically by people who wanted to ensure a more direct election, that we have the current situation. The fix is to reduce or remove penalties for unfaithful electors, not to get rid of the EC. As for the uneven distribution of electors, that's done to help ensure the less populated states have a voice and to ensure they don't try and break away. Think of it as regional affirmative action. Very few countries work off a popular vote. I can't actually think of one. Because it gives large cities too much power and sparsely populated rural areas next to none. You also need to allow for the politics and technology of when a system is started. How practical was it to count all the votes in, say, Texas and send the information to Washington in 1900?
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.